Perhaps the most common kind of error I see in writing Task 1 reports is about prepositions. It's very understandable. I mean, prepositions are very confusing, and we've all studied them in school, and we know that there are some grammar rules that govern them, but there are also exceptions to those rules, and there are phrases that need to be memorized. This lecture will be about the common uses of prepositions with describing trend graphs. I'm going to show you the most common prepositions for this purpose, as well as some example sentences, and you'll also have an opportunity to practice what you learn with exercises too. The first preposition we're going to look at then is in. This is a chart that we'll be using. It is showing the numbers of nurses and doctors that were employed by the NHS between 1955 and 1985. So the first use of preposition I'm going to show you is for using with countries and places. There were about 200,000 registered nurses in hospitals in England in 1975. So England a country, hospitals a place, so in a place, in a country. Next we have time. Years, months, and other time phrases. The number of nurses was exactly 250,000 in 1985. So in 2010, in March, in August. Months and years. A drop or increase in something. For example, investments or the number. Like there was an increase in the investments of this company. Or there was an increase in the number of sales in another company. There was a considerable drop in the number of nurses between 1965 and 1975, with about 220,000 in the former year and roughly 200,000 in the latter. So notice that this use of in doesn't describe the data, the number of the data itself. It can only be used to describe that there was an increase in something, or there was a decrease in something. You notice I use with for describing the actual numbers in this, with about 220,000, for example. So that's how in can be used. Okay, next preposition is by. The amount of increase or decrease. X started at 1 and rose by 2. Therefore, x is now 3. So 1 rose by 2, 1, 2, end result is 3. That's what by means. The number of nurses rose from 1975 to 1985 by about 50,000. So let's have a look at that. 1975 nurses is down there, and that's about 200,000. 1985, 250,000. So 200,000, 250,000, it rose by 50,000. That's what by is. Next one, who did something? For example, X was done by Y. Pretty simple, I think. Roughly 220,000 nurses were employed by the NHS in 1965. So, who did something? The number of pizzas consumed by teenagers was. The amount of gas used by the UK was, etc. Who did what? Next, something was happening before a time and finished at that time. X happened by a time phrase. By the end of the period, the number of nurses had reached its highest point. So the end of the period 1985, and that's the highest point for the nurses. So sure, it happened at that point. It's basically all it means. How a verb acted. X did Y by doing Z. The figure corrected its dip in 1975 by rising to its highest point in 1985. How did it do something? It corrected its dip by doing something, by rising. And you can see that in 1975 it was about 200,000, it was in a dip, and it rose out of it again. Next, preposition to. There's a time phrase from one time to another time. It's pretty familiar, I think. This graph depicts how many registered nurses and doctors there were in the UK from 1955 to 1985. So yeah, time phrases, that's all. Describing the end of a number moving. The number of doctors rose to just under 190,000 in 1975. So we look at 1975 for doctors. From 1965 rose to 1975 rose to just under 190,000 doctors. So that's what 2 means. It's kind of part of another prepositional phrase, really, from and to, like with the time phrases, but this is about changes in data instead. Which brings me on to the next example, measurements, from and to. Over the entire period, the number of nurses increased from 190,000 to 250,000. So yes, from 190,000 tells you the starting point, 2 is the end point, 250,000. Next, preposition at, describing a position in a graph, no movement. For example, a time phrase, X was at Y. At the beginning of the period, the number of doctors was at approximately 180,000. So, we look at the beginning, 1955, doctors, right, about 180,000. So notice that at can only be used for describing what the number is at a specific time. You can't use it with increase or decrease or some change happening. It's only what the number is at a date, and that's all. Of, the amount of increase or decrease. Sound familiar? Yes, it means the same as by, one of the uses of by, but the grammar is quite different. X witnessed an increase of 50. So there was a major increase of about 25,000 doctors from 1965 to 1975. Let's have a look. 1965 doctors, about 160,000. 1975, about 185,000. So 160,000, 70, 80, 85, 25,000. An increase of 25,000 doctors. What's the difference then between that and by? Well, of uses a noun. There was an increase of a number, a growth of, a rise of. But with by, it uses a verb. It rose by something. The number grew by, the number increased by. So that's the difference. And lastly, we have before. X did Y before doing Z. The nurses' number fell after 1965 before beginning to rise again in 1975 from about 200,000 to 250,000. So nurses, 1965, it's about 220,000. And it fell after that before beginning to rise again in 1975 from 200,000 in 1975 to 250,000. Okay, this use of before is just kind of a more sophisticated way, grammatically speaking, than saying and, really. You know, this happened, then that happened. This happened before doing something else. It's a bit more complex. It's using a present participle, the beginning, the ing form of the verb after before, and so it makes a kind of complex sentence. So that's quite nice. So now that we've looked at the common uses of prepositions with trend graphs, I'm now going to give you an opportunity to practice what you just learnt. So here we go. This is the chart that we're going to use. It shows unemployment percentages for England, France and Germany from 1990 to 2004. So I'm going to show you sentences, and each of these sentences contain errors. The mistakes are highlighted in bold, as you can see here. So pause the video, have a look at the sentence, and see if you can correct it. Okay, here we go then. 2. Right, from 1990 to 2004. It's a time phrase, it's from and to, so that's what that is. Number 2. Okay, let's see. Germany's rate began its trend by spiking from a little over 2% to just above 4% in 1992. So it began its trend. How did it begin its trend? Began it by doing something. This is describing how a verb acted, that use of by spiking. And you can see in Germany, sure, there's a spike there into 1992. From a little over 2%, that's in 1990, the beginning of the period, to just above 4%, 1992. And there you have it. Okay, here we go. England's figure rose to its highest point in 1998 with just over 12%. Rose to its highest point in 1998. Sure, that's like the from and to. It's describing the action before it and what the result is. The result is the highest point. In 1998, it's a year, so use the preposition in. That's all. Number 4. Okay. England's percentage of unemployment concluded at 10% in 2004. Or you could say with as well. If a number is concluding, then it's just saying what the number is. That's all it is describing. It's not describing a change or anything. It's just the same as what was the number at 2004 for England. Well, that was 10%. So it was at 10%. Okay. The percentage of jobless citizens in France grew by approximately 4% between 1994 and 1998. So, in France, France is a country, so it's in France, grew by approximately 4%. So, let's see that. Between 1994 and 1998, 94 and 98, France is that straight line. 1994 is about 5%. In 98 it's about 9%. So 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 4%. Grew by approximately 4%. Between 1994 and 1998, between a date and another date. These collocate together. It's the way it's got to be. Okay. Germany experienced a drop in percentage of unemployment between 1992 and 1994 of about 2.5%, but recovered from this by 1998, or in. Experienced a drop in percentage of unemployment. Right, an increase in the number of, an increase in the investments of, in the percentage of, it's a use of in. Of about 2.5%. So that's the amount of change, like with by in the previous question. Let's have a look. 92 and 94, Germany. 92, 94. 92 is about 5%, shall we say? A bit less than that, but let's say 5. 5% and then 2%. So 3, 4, 5, 3%, or about 2.5%. That's the amount it dropped. Okay. But recovered from this by 1998. Right. When did it happen? When did it recover? By that date or in that date? Okay. So in summary, preposition in is used for time, like in years, in months. It's used for places, like countries and hospitals. And it's used for describing the number, the percentage, the investment, a drop in, a rise in, like that. By is describing the time when something happened, when something changed by. It reached its highest point by 2000. It's describing the amount of change, like it rose by, for example, by 5, from 10 to 15 would be rising by 5. Describes how a verb acted, corrected its dip by rising, and describes who did something, like 10 nurses were employed by the hospital. To is used for time, from and to. used to describe the end of a number moving. The number rose to 90 in 1975. And very similarly, from and to, it's the same kind of thing. At, for describing a position in 1970, the number was at this number. Of, for describing an amount of change, this is for nouns, an increase of something. Before, describing a change, it's like saying and, so the number fell before rising again. That's how that can work.